The Encounter has been labeled as the most controversial Twilight Zone episode in the show's history, and there is substantial evidence to back up that claim. It wasn't the subject of a lawsuit like other Lost episodes, but it was not part of the series syndication package and didn't air for decades after its May 1st, 1964 debut. The Encounter is the only installment of the original series to be completely banned from television due to public outcry. Racial themes put unpleasant societal biases on screen, and while one could admire its pull-no-punches approach to holding up a mirror to our culture at the time, there are some aspects about it that didn't hold up then and don't hold up now. A World War II veteran named Fenton is cleaning out his attic when a gardener named Arthur Takamori arrives in his home. A neighbor suggested Arthur seek business for his lawn care services there. Fenton agrees to have Takamori cut his grass once a week, but invites him up to share a beer. Initially reluctant, the gardener obliges after Fenton's insistence. An item immediately catches Arthur's attention, a samurai sword that, once the young man touches, imbues him with feelings of revenge. The old veteran says he took it off the body of a Japanese soldier after it was used to almost cut his head off. He's tried to get rid of it over the years, but it always comes back. Tension builds between Fenton and Takamori, with the veteran underhandedly insulting Arthur's heritage as the Japanese-American is quick to defend himself. Arthur tries to leave at one point, but the door is inexplicably locked. Even Fenton can't pry it open. Something has taken hold of the pair. Emotions from their past and present spew out in hateful words and deadly actions. Following up Caesar and Me, this was the second and final episode for director Robert Butler. The story takes place in a cramped attic with only 2 characters, so all the blocking and camera movements were pretty limited. Still, Butler and the crew managed to pull off a decent-looking episode with the lighting and certain intriguing angles. A lot of the visuals fed off the performances. The changing looks in the eyes of both characters draw the viewer in, keeping us interested in the place of varied environments. Butler was at first wary about taking on such a complicated and tough subject. He met with producer William Frug to address his concerns and asked if the content in the script needed to go that far. In the end, the director seemed proud of the finished product, saying as much in the Blu-ray's commentary track. When Butler approached Frug about his trepidation, the writer, Martin Goldsmith, suggested to the producer that he direct the installment himself. Goldsmith didn't have any directing credits, so that certainly would have been an interesting turn of events. Frug responded by saying they'd have to pay Butler whether he directed or not, turning down Goldsmith's offer. In the Twilight Zone companion, Goldsmith elaborated further. Regarding Butler's opinion on the script, quote, "He was a young guy and was quite unhappy about the whole thing. He didn't like it, he didn't understand it," unquote. The writer's only previous episode, What's in the Box, had a lot of the same basic setup, 2 characters in one room whose hatred boils over into physical altercation. It's easy to spot the similarities, but The Encounter is dealing with much more complex themes. I think Goldsmith did well with a lot of the tragic humanity that creeps to the surface, but a few of his choices are questionable. Easily, the best attribute this episode had going for it were the performances from Neville Brand and George Takei. These guys both really knocked it out of the park, and their clashing throughout the episode, paced out from moments of tension to moments of calm and back again, created a compelling dynamic that is hard to turn away from. You want to know what happens next, and when that appeal is character and performance-based, it's a huge positive for any story. Brand as Fenton has all the hallmarks of a man whose charismatic and talkative exterior is hiding a deep pain. I think we've all met someone like this before. They talk like they're totally in control of any situation, but quickly you realize you're not even really needed to keep the conversation going. They could talk to a wall for hours. Sometimes they make snide remarks and gaslight you into thinking it's no big deal. You're the one with the problem. This happens several times when Fenton is speaking to Arthur. There are levels to him, though. He's a pretty overt racist, yet a lot of his angst and worldview grow out of problems in his personal life and wartime background. I think it's pretty clear his alcoholism stems from PTSD. He's scarred by past combat. Guilt eats him from the inside out. This leads to the arguments with his wife that he divulges and why he was fired from his job. Although, he tries to shift the blame to immigrants.
Yeah, they're letting them in from everywhere. Mexico, Puerto Rico, China, Japan, foreigners. We make Hawaii a state, and look what we get.
He's a hurt person hurting himself and letting the shortcomings of his own moral code erode his soul, and this self-resentment is taken out on other people. He's almost too pathetic to be upset with. Takei as Takamori is less outwardly flawed, but it doesn't take much to set him off.
I got a short fuse, so don't strike matches.
Both these characters are hiding painful pasts and lie to each other several times. Arthur even admits his original name was Taro. He changed it to sound more American. What seems to bring out Arthur's aggression most is the sword. It infuses him with an emotional violence that eventually turns physical, but that violence seems to have already been there, buried. He fights it the whole way and tries to escape the situation, however, there's no way out. Takei was only 27 when this was made. He'd of course soon go on to join fellow Twilight Zone alumni William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and James Doohan in the original Star Trek TV series. Arthur accuses Fenton of lying about his encounter with the Japanese soldier all those years ago. The American actually killed the soldier after he had already surrendered and took his sword as a prize. Fenton admits it and goes off about how he was trained to see the enemy as subhuman, that he's filled with hatred. He recently lost his job and his wife because of his heavy drinking habits. Fenton is alone and in need of some kind of company. Takamori also goes into his background. He was living in Honolulu as a 4-year-old boy when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Arthur's father worked for the Navy, helping construct the docks. He proclaims his dad a war hero because he tried to warn the sailors of the ambush. But Arthur then breaks down, saying that was a lie. His father was actually a traitor, a spy for the Japanese who showed them where to drop the bombs. Takamori and Fenton's shared guilt is expressed in hostility toward one another, brought out by vengeance hidden within the sword. Its inscription reads, "The sword will avenge me," and that's what happens. The pair get into another altercation over the blade. It drops to the floor and ends up piercing Fenton's belly, killing him. Arthur pulls it out and is overcome with a multitude of emotions. Takamori leaps out the high window to his death as our view pans over to the attic door, which finally swings open. While this episode is filled with racial slurs and charged insults, the main point of contention for Japanese-American groups at the time was Arthur revealing that his father was a spy helping the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. In reality, there were no such cases reported during that event or during World War II in general. This type of viewpoint was a leading factor fueling racial discrimination against Japanese Americans at the time. It's what led to millions of American citizens being placed in internment camps. George Takei and his family were among them. This episode was aired in 1964, less than 23 years after Pearl Harbor. The wounds of the war and its fallout were still relatively fresh for a lot of people, and looming on the horizon was Vietnam. It's no wonder many people had a problem with Goldsmith's choice of placing that detail into Arthur's background. Adding a fictional wrinkle to a real situation isn't anything unusual for Hollywood. Dramatizing reality is something I think most of us are used to by now, but this one in particular, at this point in time, had the potential to breed real-world consequences. Also, it just doesn't make much sense from a story perspective. You need a big secret in both characters' history, and you want them to have some symmetry. Fenton's biggest sin was committed during the war, and tying Arthur to that same conflict isn't a bad idea, but within the context of the story, he wasn't guilty of anything. I can accept the concept of familial shame, but there were ways around making his father a traitor. How about just giving Takamori a sin of his own? He admits he's a hothead. Maybe he beat some guy up and crippled him, I don't know. The options are endless, and could have easily altered this installment's biggest offense and improved the story. In the Blu-ray commentary, Takei says he was contacted directly by Japanese-American groups complaining about the episode. CBS reacted quickly and pulled it from re-airing. The actor wasn't even able to receive a copy for his own personal use. I really don't like how Arthur kills himself at the end. It's a cool-looking stunt, I guess. Takei even got to do it himself. But I think Arthur living with his own conscience after this is more terrifying psychologically than springing out a window. Do I think it's watchable in this day and age? Yes, we've seen much more envelope-pushing concepts in our media since. I think as a piece of history, and not a bad episode from an execution standpoint, it's worth seeing with the caveat that it's far from politically correct. But then again, that raw anger between these two is what makes the performances so effective, and we can't exactly pretend that these issues aren't still around. Just for the fact that it was lost for so long, contains good performances, and a mostly good story, I'd recommend it. Check it out if you can, and keep in mind what it's trying to say in a very clumsy way.
Their common bond and their common enemy, guilt. A disease all too prevalent amongst men, both in and out of the Twilight Zone.